my guest, who I'll be bringing on here just in a moment or two, is Rick Osman. And I want to see how bad I can tear up this bio. Rick Osman was selected for the United States Air Force Academy right out of high school. He later attended Vicini's University and earned an Associates of Science in Laser and Electro-Optics Technology. He worked for defense contractors a number of years and then took a job with the U.S. Navy as a civilian with an engineering support field activity specializing in radar, night vision, and laser equipment for surveillance and munitions guidance. Most of this work was in direct support of special operation forces, equipment acquisitions. In that capacity, Rick also became familiar with video teleconferencing technology. But all those years, Rick was also reading everything he could find out about the weird and unusual. Well, he's coming to the right place tonight. History, archaeology, geography, cartography, and anyways, a whole bunch of stuff, including hollow earth theory. After leaving government employment in 2004, Rick began his hunt for hidden knowledge full-time. He also began blogging, researching, and writing. And in early 2007, started an internet radio show entitled the Oopa Loopa Cafe, or I believe that's cafe. Again, my stuff is all chopped up here. In 2008, he began pestering his longtime research buddy, Dennis Crenshaw, to start another internet show about the various mysteries. Dennis chose the title, Unraveling the Secrets, and he's here tonight, and hopefully we can unravel some of those secrets. So let me go ahead and get him on the air with us here. And here we go. All right, yes, let the festivities begin. I agree. Rick Osman, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing just fine, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you tonight. Fascinating work that you do. I've been watching a lot of your videos that are out on YouTube and checking out a lot of different information. You've done some fascinating work, and I'm looking forward to talking about it tonight.
Cool. Yeah, the work continues just like any field.
Yeah, it never ends. Once you get going down that rabbit hole, it just keeps going and going and going, doesn't it?
It seems like it, yeah. In fact, an acquaintance friend of mine actually turned me on to 3 new ruins somewhere near me, a couple counties over. So I'll go investigate those as soon as I can.
Awesome. So why don't we start a little bit with some background? Give the listeners some of your background, because, you know, I chop up the bio. And
Okay. Basically, I worked for the government for a long time, whether it was directly or through a contractor. And my field there was laser and electro-optics technology, which is basically hard science as compared to most archaeology or psychology or a number of other soft sciences, I call them. So when I go into an archaeological or historical situation, I'm looking at the facts, not the interpretation of the facts. What are the facts? That's the first thing you have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And then you have to take into consideration that you may not have all the facts, ever, especially in archaeology. So I have to sympathize a little bit with the doctrinal archaeologists, because their hands are pretty much tied within most bounds as to what they can do with what they have. And they know that they don't have everything. Right. But what they will refuse to do is accept that there was any contact with ancient America before Columbus. In most cases, there are exceptions. But that is the hardest thing to break through. You can give a dozen different explanations of what an artifact was or how it was used or who made it or where, and you'll get a sane discussion. You mentioned pre-Columbian contact, and no, you're an idiot, or you're a faker, or you're a hoaxer, or maybe You're just confused. But it can't be.
Right. So now, have you ever spoke with Michael Cremo? I know he does a lot of good work as well, and he's certainly not tied in with the mainstreamers.
He is not. He certainly is not tied in with the mainstreamers. In fact, a number of the mainstreamers tried to get his television show, a television show done about his book, Forbidden Archaeology, tried to get it banned, and he tried to get, I believe it was NBC, to retract all of it. And it didn't happen. Michael Cremo is, in that regard, if nothing else, a little bit of a hero.
Yeah, I've had him on the show several times. I love Michael Cremo. He's same thing. You know, he goes for the facts and he says it like it is, and you know, he doesn't let anybody bend or break him, and I like that.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
And there is another artifact that has come to light close by me that would interest him a lot. It's actually in a museum nearby, and it is a metal that seems to presume to be copper-based, probably brass, and it came from a coal seam. So, interesting.
Very interesting.
So that would be right up Michael's alley.
Yeah, you know, when I talk to him, he says that there's enough evidence to show that mankind has been here hundreds of thousands of years. He said even millions of years in some aspects.
Well, there's certainly some evidence. Mm-hmm. How you interpret that evidence is entirely up to your belief system, believe it or not.
Right.
Whether that's hardcore science or whatever. But, of course, you also have the young earthers who would say, oh, no, it's not that old. You're just misreading what the geology's telling you. It's, you know, the Earth's only 4,800 years old. I'm not one of those, by the way. Okay. But the upshot is there are a lot of mysteries. The evidence is out there. Whether you can prove to me that those metallic spheres are somehow a natural phenomenon is going to be kind of tough until you can actually demonstrate it for me. Because one theory is as good as another until you have some demonstration of a theory. And nobody knows how those spheres came to be. You know the ones I'm talking about that are in 2-billion-year-old strata.
Yeah.
Michael's done amazing work along that line. But there are other things, like for instance, the metal vessels in coal seams or a gold necklace that fell out of a piece of coal. Dozens of examples in, I won't say in the literature because they won't accept it as scientific literature. It's newspaper accounts and, you know, anything. It might be Argosy magazine. That doesn't mean it's absolutely false. It simply means that there wasn't a qualified entire university there to witness it. There were a lot of witnesses who were credible people, however.
Right. And I want to get into quite a bit of that as we move along, but I did want to ask you about the hollow earth and whether you believed that it's possible that there's a hollow earth, and if so, what might wait below?
Well, strangely enough, I do believe that there is a void at the center of the earth. It's not a belief, it's a calculation, actually.
I see. That's better than a belief.
Yeah, it's the basis of the theory is that, or my interpretation of the theory, is that the acceleration due to gravity at the exact center of the earth is zero. Uh-huh. Well, that's not just my theory, that's just the way it is. And actually, from the exact center of the earth, the acceleration vector would be pointing out. Just that zero is the sum of all of it. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's zero at the exact center and it's actually pulling towards the outside, there's actually more gravitational mass, if you will, outside the center of the earth than there is at the center of the earth. Therefore, what would normally be, you know, what they call the hard core, the solid core, would be there. But that doesn't make sense the solid core should be at about 2/3 the radius. I'm sorry, 1/3 the radius from the center out. And what's inside there, how much of that would be a void, that's kind of tough to say, because we don't have any good science. All we have is theory. The deepest hole that's ever been bored was a little bit short of 14 kilometers in Kola in Siberia, Kamchatka. And they got results they did not expect. They got results that do not match the accepted geological theory. But rather than adapt the theory to newly found facts, they say that's anomalous and we're going to stick with our theory.
I see. I was always under the impression, I have some friends in the chat who on various nights will talk about the Earth being hollow. And I always said, well, if it was hollow and there was a major earthquake, wouldn't it all just collapse? I don't know.
No, actually it would not, because the mass and distribution of the mass would not significantly change with regards to where the center of mass is.
I see.
It would be felt, but what I'm saying is it's not attracted to the center of the Earth except as a sum vector. It's attracted to the mass around it. Mass attracts mass. That's what Newton gave us, and that part's still true no matter what you do to the rest of the physics. What Newton said, he didn't say that the apple fell to Earth. He said that the apple and the Earth fell towards each other. Just that the Earth had a lot more mass and therefore a lot more inertia, and it seemed like the Earth didn't move. But it did, even against the mass of an apple. And that's what he demonstrated by the invention of calculus. Smart guy.
Yeah, that's incredible. So then it is possible, or even more than possible, it may be that we have a hollow Earth, a big area inside the Earth that's hollowed out, and I mean, people would be able to actually live in it?
No, I'm not willing to go that far, because
good.
there's so much more to that as far as it being a hollow space, because if that's true, now you're looking at the possibility of what we call zero crossing energies. And that would be the vacuum energy, the energy from the vacuum, the ZPM module from Stargate. It takes the energy of the vacuum and converts it to energy that we can use in our spectrum.
I see.
And that is, when you get down into the deepest theories, way past Einstein, in fact, a little bit past Michio Kaku, you get to the point of each one of those is a little black hole, white hole pair. And by those forming at the center of the Earth, where there would be a gravitational gradient, you could actually be making new matter from nothing.
I see. I was looking into I was looking into some of this earlier today, and I noticed Plato had wrote of enormous subterranean tunnels that were both broad and narrow that made up the Earth's interior. And I'm wondering, could there be actual tunnels going all through?
Well, if you believe Tau Levesque, yeah, at least in North America and probably elsewhere. But, the United States, even down to municipalities, have spent millions, even billions of dollars on tunnel boring machines. One made the news recently in Seattle because it got stopped by something, turned out to be an 8-inch pipe, but they didn't know it was there, therefore they stopped the progress of the boring machine for a while. But tunnel boring machines are big business, and some of the current technologies were developed by the United States Air Force, which is a little weird all by itself, but they did nonetheless. In fact, they had, at least on paper, an atomic-powered tunnel boring machine.
Uh-huh. So, but I mean, would they be able to go that deep? I mean, I would think that, they'd bury themselves if they kept going. Maybe.
Well, it's not only that, but what do they do with the tailings?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I know that there's been a lot of speculation. As you know, there's people who got all kinds of theories, and one theory was that there's actually a somewhat of a sun in the center of the earth that provides sunlight and heat and this and that. And I won't go that far. I've always said, well, it's possible that it could be a hollow earth, but I don't know. You're clearing it up for me here tonight, though, because I always thought I had the answer. I said, well, if it was hollow, there was an earthquake, it'd collapse. But now I'm finding out I was wrong.
Well, yeah, the physics says it would not collapse. It would change because that much of energy release will change anything. But that takes us back to the inner sun and this new matter creation. Because in order for that new matter creation to happen, there would be a lot of waste energy. And if it was at a pinpoint at the center of the earth in this void, then that would be a very, very energetic space that would not support life as we know it, because you cook instantly. It's just, there are 4 terawatts of energy emanated from the earth every day that the earth did not get from the sun or any other part of the solar system or any place outside the earth itself. That's just energy release. Now, the conventional geology and planetology says that's leftover friction from when the earth formed 4 billion years ago.
Yeah, everything seems to be from the earth forming 4 billion years ago, But somebody in the chat here asked, doesn't the core revolve in a certain direction? Well, I lost it here now. In a certain direction.
It does revolve in a certain direction. It also revolves at a slightly different rate than the outer crust. And is it a dynamo effect? Well, maybe. Maybe that's what's making all that waste heat.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's burning off some of that waste heat. I think it could go either way. Okay. Some of that waste energy, I should say, because it wouldn't be heat at its original point. But the idea of a void opens up a whole different range of how do you interpret the current or accepted theories of geology and planetology. Well, it would change a lot of things. First of all, it would change, most significantly to Earthlings, how we interpret the existence of Earth's magnetic field, or its existence at all. Why does it exist at all? And they'll tell you, oh, well, it's because we got this big ball of iron, molten iron, and it's inside the Earth, and it's spinning, so it makes a dynamo effect. If you look in any metallurgy text reference of any kind, it will tell you that molten iron cannot be magnetized. Uh-huh. So I don't know. That part just doesn't quite add up for me. And you also have Mars, which has no magnetic field, and its crust is primarily red from iron. What is blue is from iron-containing hematite, which was formed in water, by the way. Hematite was. So there are all kinds of questions of planetology that just don't quite add up unless you factor in that void with a zero-crossing, naturally occurring energy point.
Okay. And now there's this Dr. Edmund Haley, I think his name is.
Yes.
Who I guess he believes that all heavenly bodies were hollow, like, Mars and Earth and Jupiter and you name it, whatever planets are out there, that they're all hollow. And, there is people out there who speculate that if there was life on Mars, that it could very well be living underground. So, I mean, do you think that it's all like that, all planets? I mean, could it pop? Could this collapse, this hole?
Well, the hole itself could collapse or it could grow. Anything, it's all interrelated. It has to be, because in order for this to occur, it's a black hole, white hole thing, like I was saying earlier. But the existence of a white hole is dependent upon the existence of a black hole. and they have exactly opposite definitions. Anything that falls into a black hole can never be seen again because it's a black hole. It can never be experienced again at all. And anything that enters it cannot exit it. Nothing can exit a black hole. On the opposite end, a white hole only produces energy and or matter, and nothing can enter it. It's the other end of that black hole.
Yeah.
And that,
so, I mean, has that been proven without a doubt? That, because sometimes I've speculated myself even that maybe, those are portals to other parts of the universe or something, but no.
Precisely.
Wow. Okay.
Precisely. And if this is my hypothesis, and there is a way to test it, actually, just not easily. The black hole at the center of a galaxy, ours as an example, the Milky Way, would be connected to each body in the galaxy. And all of the matter that falls into that black hole at the center of the galaxy is re-emitted to bodies at the farthest edge of the galaxy. It's a self-redeeming process, because otherwise the galaxy simply dies.
Oh, I see it. So it's kind of like it's blood flow.
It is a lot like that, except I can't even say that's an oversimplification, because it's not. It carries the essential things for the life of a galaxy.
That's fascinating.
I'm sorry?
I say that's fascinating.
It is, and it's all theoretical at this point. But for each black hole, there's a multitude of white holes. And when I say a multitude, a galaxy full of white holes. Each rocky body, each gaseous body, no matter how large or small, if this hollow body theory is true, then each one of those could essentially form a white hole that is connected to the galactic black hole as an energy source, energy conduit, if you will, that ignores space and time. Mm-hmm. It's all real time. It's all now.
Now, I know scientists were playing around with the idea of creating a black hole in a laboratory. I mean, is that something they've done? Can it be done? And would it be advised to do something like that?
Let's start with the last question first. No.
That's what I thought.
As far as whether it's possible, yes, I think it is possible. Whether they have done it, no, because we're still here.
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer.
You can't build a magnetic bottle to hold something that doesn't exactly have a magnetic signature, and that's the main proposal. Okay. Even if you want to talk about it being at CERN or wherever, it's still a magnetic bottle, but you're not talking about something that behaves in something in any fashion of a normal physics makeup as we know it.
Uh-huh. So now, from now on, if a listener brings up the hollow earth, I should just listen and be quiet then, huh?
Well, no, not at all. Now you're better armed. Now you can have a discussion.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Now, somebody else, Rascala says, Admiral Byrd had an expedition to the Arctic Circle and found a hollow earth, he says. Do you know anything about that?
I know that he had an expedition to the Arctic Circle. It's now questioned whether he actually made it to fly over the North Pole. He was not gone long enough for the events portrayed in that so-called diary to have taken place. He was tracked. He was off radio for, I think it was 39 minutes total. And that would not have contained the 5 or 6 hours as portrayed in that diary, which was, in the opinion of Dennis Crenshaw, who's probably done far more research on Hollow Earth than anybody I know. He thinks that one was a hoax for money. just that the money never produced.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that goes on, and it's too bad because that really interferes with the truth. It confuses people, and we see this all the time, especially with the internet now.
But Admiral Byrd, Richard E. Byrd, of the Byrd family of Virginia, going back to 1711 or something like that, and who still has living relatives. Anyway, he also led an expedition to the South Pole. And it was actually two of them. One in 1936, when they went for supposedly an entirely purely scientific expedition, and they built special vehicles and had planes mounted on land vehicles so that they could take off at a moment's notice. And they did a lot of scientific research, and they got back to New York City, and all the scientific research was handed over to Rockefeller because it was not a Navy-sponsored undertaking. In 1947, a different operation, a naval operation and naval sea operation to Antarctica, left some people behind, apparently. There have been a lot of different interpretations of the facts, but the facts are that some people died. And it's been extrapolated that they were after the remnants of the Nazi regime, who were by then using alien technology. I don't know how much of that is true. I do know that Operation High Jump was real. I do know that they called it off long before they were supposed to. It was publicly declared its intent as testing military apparatus in, the coldest conditions on the planet, which I'm sure it did that. Except they did it in Antarctic summer. Anyway, I don't know what was real with that one. But in 1936, the Rockefellers ended up with all the data. Now, also, during that expedition, Byrd, according to Tim Cridland's research, give credit where credit is due, Byrd founded a secret society and swore several members of the expedition into that society. What it is or what they did or anything is, who knows? But its existence is fairly well documented.
Yeah, that's a shame. These, these secret societies. I mean, boy, if we could just get into their secret vaults and libraries, the things we probably learn, huh?
Well, the other thing is we have to know what we're looking for.
True.
Not only do we, and just like with the federal government, not only do you, when you fill out a Freedom of Information Act request, you not only have to know exactly what you're looking for, but you have to tell them where to find it. If you have a document number, it becomes pretty easy, but almost never does that happen.
Oh, I know. I've tried, and I've failed at every attempt of anything that I've ever wanted to get. It's like they want, specifics. And it's like, I don't know. Find it and send it to me. They won't do it.
No. And they'll charge you for the time of looking for it if you want to press on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the way it is.
All right, Rick, we're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, we could talk about some ancient history, if you will. And if anyone has any questions or comments after the break, whether it be Hollow Earth or anything else we're talking about tonight, we will take it. And Rick, let's talk a little bit about ancient history and how far back can we go, and what do we know about us, the human being, and our existence on this rock that we call home?
Wow.
Good question.
What do we know for sure? Well, let's see.
Yeah.
Okay, mankind's been around a long time. Mankind, according to the conventional view, erupted from whatever, about 120,000 years ago. And apparently he immediately set sail for Crete. Built a boat and navigated to Crete because that's how old the artifacts are on Crete. Now, was that a human civilization or was it a different manually dexterous and somewhat intelligent bipedal that made tools? Don't know, but we know that somebody sailed to Crete at least 120,000 years ago. So when I hear people say, oh no, they couldn't possibly have navigated from Europe to America before, I don't know, 1,000. It's like, really? Because when you hopscotch across Iceland, Faroe Islands, and Iceland and Greenland into North America, you're about 300 miles on the longest stretch of open ocean. And they went half that to get to Crete 120,000 years ago. So don't tell me they couldn't navigate. They knew the stars. They drew star maps 100 BC. A guy by the name of Hipparchus, a Greek, 107 BC, I think it was. He actually published a catalog of stars, the 1,000 most prominent stars visible from Greece, and he was accurate in their position to about 3 arc seconds. In a time when, according to conventional historians, he couldn't possibly have had the optics and other tools to actually measure those angles, and yet he did pretty well. He did really well. Another Greek, roughly earlier, 300 and, let me see, I forget the exact date of when Pytheas lived, but he supposedly sailed from Marseille all the way around the British Isles, including Ireland, and sailed north and encountered what most people would interpret as Iceland. And he was disbelieved and reviled by later historians, except for the first generation. First generation believed him. Apparently, he must have had some evidence of some kind. But then the evidence was lost, and the later historians said, oh no, that couldn't possibly be real. He might as well have been writing about dragons. Well, that came later with the Romans, but that's a different story entirely. And if Pytheas sailed all the way to Iceland and then returned to Greece, he had to been looking for something, even if it was just knowledge. So, roughly 3,000 years ago, people were sailing out of the Mediterranean into some of the worst parts of the open ocean that we know today. And they were doing it a long time ago and living through it.
It's curious to me as to when people just looked at that ocean one day and said, you know what, let's try to build something to go on it. You would think that, I guess they overcame their fears eventually.
Well, some of them did for sure.
Yeah.
But they also had to have a reason to do it. And sure, you got some folks that just want to sail around the world because they conquer the world that way. And one guy that did that in the early part of the 20th century, he did about a third of the trip without using a sextant. He used ancient methods and still navigated just fine.
Well, that's fascinating.
Celestial navigation is not rocket science. And yeah, sure, the better your tools are, the better you can be at it. But when people will tell you that, no, they couldn't possibly have navigated longitude because they didn't have a chronometer. Oh, yeah, they had a chronometer, and they didn't have to wind it. The whole star field is a chronometer. You just have to know how to use all of its aspects. You can't use just the stars. You have to use the stars, the moon, and the sun. And if you have then a nautical almanac, which, by the way, the U.S. Navy still publishes, you can track the stars even without a sextant, to get your star bearings and know A, what time it is, and B, where you are in the world.
See,
spherical navigation.
And our ancient ancestors just do not get enough credit for how intelligent they actually were. I'm so sick of hearing how, they use primitive tools and stuff. I think that, I don't know. I would think sometimes they might have had some pretty good technologies because they knew a lot. And they didn't have the internet, from what I understand.
And they built things we can't possibly duplicate today.
Exactly.
And it may not be that we don't have the technology, but we cannot expend that much of our human energies to build the Great Pyramid, as one example, because we're too busy trying to feed the poor guy that's destitute on the corner.
Well, not here in Columbia, South Carolina. I
No.
understand that they've just made it illegal to be homeless here.
Hmm.
Isn't that something?
Well, that was last seen during the Great Depression. If I, that we digress a little bit,
Yeah.
but in ancient history, you had uh, all kinds of examples of people who could sail, who could do amazing engineering feats. Just for instance, the ancient Romans and their aqueducts and their use of concrete and their use of metallurgy. They had water-powered sawmills to saw stone, to saw marble. That's in their history books. They had a catapult that would throw a 100-pound stone a quarter of a mile. That's how they conquered Masada. They had different weapons that were hand-cranked and repeating crossbows, essentially. And yeah, that's been a fixture in certain science fiction fantasy movies for a long time, but this one was not fantasy. They actually made it work. And they had aqueducts that would bring water, 60, 80, 100 miles to power said sawmills as well as baths and sewers. It wasn't for drinking, by the way. Nobody drank the water. They drank wine. Even the poor people drank. Even the slaves drank wine because it didn't have sewage in it.
All right. And so now, of all your studies that you've done up to this point, I guess I usually ask all my great guests this. What would be probably the top few things that you've discovered, however you did it, that mainstream will not accept, but it's fact?
Well, probably the biggest one, and I didn't discover it so much as rediscover it because it was pretty much known in the first half of the 19th century that through the Ohio Valley and way beyond, all the tributaries up into Wisconsin and further, there was a network of line of sight communications posts. They were towers for the most part. Sometimes it was a mound. Usually it was just a natural hill. But they would send signals by either reflected light or a burning something, and they had a continental communications network. When I say they, I'm not going to put a name on it. I'm not going to say it was Native American. I'm not going to say it was invasive. I'm saying somebody did. So regardless of whoever it was, they had a sophisticated communications network. And it was also redundant because it had multiple paths to carry the signal. So that if one path got lost, it was sucked in with weather, maybe the other one could do it. And this was certainly active during the time of the Mississippian, early to mid-Mississippian, and then it declined for some reason. And they had a continental-wide trade network as well as political setup of some kind. We don't know the details, but we have enough indications from some of the tribes that, it was a big deal, and there was a lot of slave trade and even some human sacrifice going on, as well as a touch of cannibalism here and there. But the use of the watchtowers, what I've discovered is it has a very close analog in Europe and North Africa. And it pre-existed the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire used it extensively wherever they could find it pre-existing. In some places where they were new invaders, they would extend their particular network. When Claudius invaded, and that's an overstatement, when Claudius arrived in Britain, he realized real sudden, like he didn't have near enough soldiers to control any population, let alone that population. So he sent a signal back to Rome to send an entire new legion, which would have been 5,500 troops plus however many camp followers that would be, probably a total of 10 to 12,000 people. The message is recorded in history. The message left Britain the same day that it arrived in Rome. They didn't send it by ship.
Yeah, that's for sure.
That's pretty sophisticated. And it was just as extensive on this side of the pond. But who was doing it here is the question.
Well, and that's just like things like the pyramids and you know, you see them all over the planet. And you know, so it wasn't just one village's idea or something along those lines. I mean, you know, somebody, I don't know, might have made blueprints and got those blueprints around.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting, particularly about Giza pyramids, is the limestone casing, which is just a trace of it left at the top, very top of the pyramids. And it is not the same limestone native to the Giza Plateau. It was all imported from someplace. And it is oolite, Oolite limestone. Um, Oddly enough, about 50 miles from me is a town called Oolitic, spelled Oolitic, Indiana. And it is in the middle, literally, of the Indiana limestone country. Finest architectural limestone in the world by most accounts. And it's a real close match chemically and geologically to what is left of the casings on the Great Pyramid.
You know, they're finding pyramids all the time now on the ocean floor. I think they just discovered another one somewhere. I forget exactly where it is, but what do you think happened there? Pole shift, or I mean, they certainly didn't build them there under the water.
No, they did not build them underwater. They existed above the water line at least briefly. And I'd say it's a mixture. Part of it is a rise in sea level from the Ice Age. Probably we're talking somewhere between 300 and 600 feet total rise in sea level. That's a lot. But then you also find, like off the coast, west coast of Cuba, this complex that supposedly is 2,500 feet down, half a mile down. Uh, no, you can't account for that with all the glaciers melting all at once. The only thing that I can see that would explain that would be a massive earthquake shift of that part of the crust. Not all of the crust, just that little part where that complex sat, and it just shifted down the hill, just fell as a piece, and pretty much stayed intact when it got to the bottom.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I always find that interesting because, you know, I know people make a bigger deal out of some of these things than, you know, there are people who fearmonger out there and say, oh, it's this is going to happen, that's going to happen. But I don't make too light of a lot of it because, you know, as you can tell, these things have happened before. I mean, you know, and that was my point. Somebody said, well, they probably built them under the ocean. No, because why would they need stairs?
Well, that's one very valid point. But they also had effigies of land animals. So, okay, it's not some underwater species building it, unless they're building icons to their gods that live on land. I don't know. But Yokagumi is Yoka. I can never say that correctly.
Well,
Over there off the south coast of Japan.
I was going to say, if you can't say it, I know I
Yonaguni.
can.
I think that's right. Yonaguni. Anyway, it's 90 feet under, but 11,000 years ago, it would have still been 300 feet up on top of a hill or a mountain, if you want to look at it that way. 11,000 years ago. And that's cut stone. That's not just chiseled. You can actually still see some saw marks on it.
Yeah.
So they had metal technologies of some kind, hard metal, hard enough to cut that stone.
Maybe they had some sort of laser technology as well. I don't know.
That really isn't all that effective on
No.
granite.
Okay. All right.
Actually, abrasives wire works, but not real well.
Yeah, that's some fascinating stuff, and you know what? That's one of the things that I look at and I'm amazed by is these pyramids that they're finding all over the place, all over the earth. And you know, if they were supposed to be such primitive people and they didn't have these technologies and they weren't able to, you know, they didn't have flight and all this stuff, well, they certainly weren't sending the blocks over on pigeons' feet. So, you know, something was going on there.
Amazot. They had
Yeah,
little drones delivering them.
I don't doubt it. You know, and you said 11,000 years ago, and isn't that right around the time that most believe Atlantis had existed?
Yeah, 12,000 years. According to, if you do all the math with Plato, it ends up being right at 12,000 years. But most people say, oh, no, that's an exaggeration. It's got to be Santorini 1,200 years ago. And my apologies to my friends who are on that particular track, but that's not what Plato said. Plato described 9,000 years before his time. So that's 12,000 years from before now. And that's also strangely coincidental to the biggest part of the melt off from the last ice age. It's also coincidental to the supposed comet or cometary fragment strike in North America, according to Firestone and that crew, who did 36 different disciplines of science trying to get to the bottom of this. And some of the best hard science I've ever seen applied to archaeology.
Nice.
But yeah. And History Channel, I believe it's History, might have been Discovery, did a 2-hour documentary. I think it was 2-hour documentary about their research, and they had goofy graphics of mastodons burning in the firestorm. But other than that, it was pretty good. If they'd left out those goofy graphics, I'd have been satisfied.
Yeah, I've got a question in the chat, and I'm going to try to get it. Please PM me your questions, because if you put them in the regular chat there, everybody's
they go
chat.
Zoom and they're gone.
Yeah. Mario asks, Michael, can you ask him if he is aware of any impending event that can have catastrophic changes for Earth? And I guess that would leave it wide open to a lot of things, right?
Oh, yeah. You've got the unpredictables, something going nova in our neighborhood. You've got, and that's actually a 3-stage thing. We won't care about the second or third, though, because we'll be going in the first stage. You've got extraterrestrial impacts. The next big chunk that I'm aware of that has a real chance of doing that is in 2039. So there is time to divert it if NASA can get their stuff together regarding near-Earth objects. There's always Yellowstone, and there's always the Pacific Rim and all the volcanic stuff that could happen at any moment and has been happening for billions of years.
Do you think
we're existing in this little narrow window of, hey, we're fine right now?
Yeah, and a lot of people think it'll always be. And, you know, one thing that people do that I guess we're all guilty of it at some point in our lives, where we believe, well, that can't happen because I'm here. These things don't happen to me.
Well, they only happen to you once.
That's for sure. Well, as far as we know, that's the case. Yeah, one time only. Now, could the sun, like a solar flare or something like that, could that set off a Yellowstone event?
I don't think it could directly. It could be one of those butterfly effect things that if everything hit just right, yeah, it would contribute to it. But we probably wouldn't have to worry much about that anyway, because if there was a major coronal mass ejection, we wouldn't be talking, because there would be no internet, there would be no electricity, there would be no running vehicles unless they were completely diesel or steam. There wouldn't be airplanes because there wouldn't be navigation satellites, and there wouldn't be communication satellites, and even the fiber optic network would fry if it was a big one. Now, that would only happen on one side of the Earth, more or less. So take your pick. Which side do you want to be on, and do you know exactly when it's going to hit?
Well, that would be dangerous, you know. And talking about objects that could maybe impact the Earth, you know, you look at what happened in Russia. And, you know, they totally missed that comet or asteroid or whatever it was that came in and hit Russia. And
yeah, they don't know if it was a dirty snowball or a snowy dirt ball, but something actually hit, and it was big enough that its shock wave could have leveled the city. Now, in 1908, it leveled 200,000 square miles of trees and killed 8 people, because that's all the people that were in that 200,000 square miles.
I got nervous today. I was sitting here, about 5 o'clock this evening, and I was, getting ready for tonight's show, and all of a sudden I heard a big explosion, and everything shook. I go outside, and it's like I walked into another world. There's nothing going on out there. I said, now, where the hell did that come from? I mean, it was loud. I thought the gas station across the street blew up. That's how loud and shaking it was. But nobody else came out of their doors to look. I was the only one. I said, well, maybe I'm imagining this stuff. I don't know.
Maybe it was targeted on you.
Yeah, it could be. I actually have some friends who claim that type of thing can be done. That you could be targeted, and I mean, they could. I don't know. You can have an earthquake all by yourself.
It's true. It's all in how it's administered.
Yeah.
It's like a standing wave, and it goes back to that whole hollow earth theory and why the current interpretation can't be right, because waves of any kind diverge, and you can also make them converge. You can induce, for lack of a better term, sympathetic waves, but a standing wave that is coherent, like a laser beam, can be manipulated using a sonic or seismic wave as well. It's a lot harder to contain it seismically, but it's pretty amazing how it can work.
Well, that's kind of disturbing because, I mean, when I walked out the door, I was just coming out the door, and my wife was just pulling in with the kids, and she got out of the car, and I said, did you hear that? She goes, hear what? I said, did you feel it? She goes, feel what? I was like, you got to be kidding me. But here's something now. When I went out there, the first thing I noticed in the sky was there was 2 planes going by up high, and of course they're spraying their chemtrails. But then off to the distance of that was a military chopper that was going by. And probably, I don't know, a couple hours before that, I was talking to somebody on the phone, and I said, holy cow, did you hear that? I mean, it sounded like a fighter jet. It was like right above my roof when it went by. So there's a lot of stuff going on over here. I thought maybe the helicopter dropped something on accident or on purpose and blew something up, but I didn't see no smoke, no fire. And I'm telling you, everything shook here. It was like King Kong come and just grabbed the place and shook it around a little bit.
Well, you don't live on a sinkhole, do you?
Oh God, I hope not. I really hope not. I haven't heard of any problems with sinkholes here in South Carolina. I haven't heard of any. But I know Florida has had a great deal of problems with that, and I think Louisiana also. So, yeah,
and in the Yucatan Peninsula, they call them cenotes, but it's basically the same thing, except the water table's higher in Florida.
I see. So now, okay, sinkholes. Let's talk about that for a minute. What could be going on there? Some are blaming fracking, and others think that it could be, I don't know, the crust of the earth may be starting to shift.
Well, geologically, if you want to believe all of them, it's a slow erosion of the stone, of the basement stone, and it gets a little hole in it, and it just keeps eating away, and then all of a sudden all the soil goes through that little crack into the cave system.
See, now I would buy that if it wasn't happening in so many places, all seems like nearly at the same time here.
Well, that's kind of the thing, though. It has always happened. We haven't always been around to notice it. For instance, Lake Apopka in central Florida is one of the biggest bodies of water inland Florida, and it is a big sinkhole. In fact, almost all the natural lakes in Florida are sinkholes. It's varying in size. But if they were in the Yucatan, they would be cenotes, and they'd be full of Mayan relics. Which, by the way, apparently there's quite a black market in diving into those places to really retrieve some of those pre-Columbian relics. And it's a deadly business, by the way, on both sides. The government is armed and dangerous, so don't go stealing stuff.
Oh, yeah, and they'll take you out, too.
Yes, they will.
Yeah.
Because if you market it, they can't.
That's right. That's right. Now, this sinkhole in Louisiana, it's a rather large one. I think it's been going on since, I want to say, 2011. Now, I could be a little off there.
I think you're about right.
Yeah, and this thing has just gotten so huge. And, you know, I don't know, is it going to swallow the whole state or what? It just keeps growing.
Well, it may swallow the whole delta, but then most of the delta as we know it today hasn't existed for 150 years. It's mostly new stuff that's washed out of all the farmlands.
Oh, okay.
So there were, you know, literally thousands of canals cutting through the old delta. And the new delta is full of canals for the petrochemical industry.
Uh-huh.
But that brings up the question, why were the old canals there? What did they need? Why did they need such a vast and complicated trade route in the Mississippi Delta 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 7,000 years ago? But they had it. They also had one in Central Florida.
Yeah, what about what looks like ancient airports, too? You know,
Nazca.
Yeah, so there's
China Lake, California.
A lot of questions. But these sinkholes, getting back to that real quick, you know, they've been concerning. I mean, there's been one guy in Florida getting ready for bed. Well, he was in bed, and his whole bedroom just sunk. I mean, they never found the guy. That was the end of him. I mean, with holes opening up, and I've gone on the internet now, and I know there's a lot of fake stuff there, so I'm careful what I'm looking at. But there's been, I mean, around the world, this has been going on. I've seen cars will be driving, and all of a sudden the road just swallows them in.
Well, yeah, and in the case of the roads, I'm not too surprised because they always have a culvert or a water main or something right there that wasn't properly maintained and it ate out the road base. But when you see, for instance, a city block in Guatemala go whoosh, or Argentina go whoosh, and people are standing around waiting for it to go because it's been starting for days, just the building is holding up the soil immediately under it, and then it all gives way. I don't know if you've seen that one, but that one's real.
Yeah, I did see that. I mean, it was literally, is that the one where buildings were actually getting swallowed in?
Yep.
Yeah.
And they still had clotheslines attached to them.
Oh, yeah, and I see people they go walk to the edge looking. I'm like, what are you, crazy? Get away from it.
I know the answer to that question.
I think I do, too. They're definitely crazy. I mean, I'd be running away from that thing, not going to look in.
Yeah, I'd be looking for some helium balloons real fast.
But absolutely.
Which is another entire shortage that's unaddressed. We're running out of helium. That's why the Chinese are going to the moon.
Really? Oh, do tell.
The moon is rich in what they call H3, helium-3, which is the progenitor for deuterium, a radioactive isotope of hydrogen that can be used for fission and or fusion energy studies. But there's not enough helium left on the Earth to capture to actually get enough out of it.
How did we run out of helium? I mean, it's just, I'm not, I haven't gone to school for any of this, so I'm learning right now.
Helium being the lightest, second lightest element that we have, what is in the Earth's atmosphere immediately goes to the top of the atmosphere. And it's really hard to collect it there. The helium that we do get out of the atmosphere is really hard to get out of the atmosphere. And it's getting less and less all the time. It's used for a lot of things, not just helium balloons. It's used for cryogenics. It's used for a number of scientific tests and commercial industrial procedures. So we've used it up. Even the Navy, the U.S. Navy, which has historically used helium to lift their aerostats and various other, lighter than air craft, they're about to leave that business, not because they want to, because they can't conduct those missions anymore.
So now, what is the severity of us running out of helium? What will that do? I mean, will that unbalance things? I mean, is this something to worry about?
Well, in the case of the Chinese moon landings, it would be someone who is not really good at keeping United Nations treaties regarding sacrosanct areas. And they are resource hungry, all manners of resource. That's why they planted flags on the bottom of the ocean at the Spratly Islands, because they want the oil that's available at the Spratly Islands. They planted a Chinese flag on the moon, symbolically, to claim the moon, just as the United States did. But we haven't gone back to say, hey, we need to drive a fence post to maintain our claim here. We've got to homestead this. We've got to have people here to actually claim the moon. And the Chinese are going to beat us out on that. But the real aspect, the important part of that is they are the ones who are going to be mining resources from a different body in the solar system. And they'll probably start with deuterium because, first of all, it's very light in weight and mass. Therefore, it's easy to launch back to Earth, easier than, say, rocks or ore. Anything that we retrieve from the moon or any other body is going to have to be refined there to make it anywhere close to cost effective to bring back for our use here. Deuterium is extremely light. It can actually be used as a propellant if you need to, because it doesn't have to burn. It just has to provide a mass force vector. Anyway, deuterium will eventually empower whatever political power controls it. They will control fusion, comparatively safe nuclear energy.
Yeah, and I worry about the weapons that can be placed up there as well.
No, well, up on the moon, yes, but fusion energy is, to the best of my ability to discern, is not capable of being turned into a weapon. It takes more energy to start it than it would ever produce as a useful weapon.
I see. But I guess I'm thinking more along the lines of whatever kind of energy weapons they could probably set up, I don't know, nukes and things like that. But at the same token, if they were going to do that, why not do it right from here, right?
Yeah. Well, what they could do would be establish an immune colony so that their progeny would inherit the Earth on the next round.
Hey, now there's some thinking, yeah. Yep. I go under this impression that I think that, when we talk about the New World Order here a lot of nights, and I've come to the conclusion that they're all in it together. I mean, whoever it is making the final decision for whatever country it is, I think they're all in it together. And I think in the end, they hope to come together and conquer, whatever there is to conquer left. So,
well, they don't have to conquer it. We're going to end up giving it to them.
Well, we are giving it to them. We absolutely
as a bailout. But getting back to the whole ancient history thing and the pre-Columbian contact with America, there's a really strong case that the Chinese made multiple contacts in North America before Columbus ever got here. Well, actually, Columbus never made it to the United States, and it's questionable if he ever made it to North America at all. He certainly made it to Cuba and Santiago. And
I laugh when people tell me, Columbus discovered America. I having that discussion with the kids here the other day, and, they're learning in school. And she was all happy, and she says, Columbus discovered America. And I said, yeah, let's talk about that.
Thank you for that. Thank
Yeah,
you for making sure that there is an alternative viewpoint.
yeah, oh,
And there are a
absolutely.
lot of alternatives to Columbus. But the not only the United States government, but before it, the English government, the French government, the Spanish government, Portuguese government, even the Swedish colonies and the Russian colonies were all dependent upon what is called the doctrine of discovery. And I want to thank Robert J. Miller, who teaches law at the Lewis and Clark University in Oregon, for really defining this for me. It all goes back to the doctrine of discovery, which is based on a papal bull entitled Terra Nullius. And I believe the year was 1452 when the Pope said, okay, you conquistadors and such, if you go out and you discover a country that has no Christians in it, then you can claim it because there are no Christians in it. And we want everybody to be Christians. And if they're not Christians and won't convert, you can kill them or enslave them or do whatever you want with them because they're not Christians. So when Columbus gets to the Caribbean and he plants the Spanish flag, right beside it he plants the papal flag and a cross. And he holds a little ceremony claiming that land for the nation of Spain and for the Catholic Church. But the Terra Nullius is still based on the idea that there were no Christians there. So back to North America for just a moment. Let's start with Canada. We know now that in about 1000 AD, there was a quote unquote Viking colony. Norse, certainly. Viking is questionable. Norse colony in North America. And they say, oh no, the archaeologists and historians and the Parks Canada and all these people are saying, oh no, it wasn't a colony. It was just they pulled in to repair their ships. And they built 4 longhouses capable of housing about 100 people. They had a workshop with a forge and a number of other metallurgy type toolings. There were ship's nails everywhere. There were spindle whorls, meaning they spun yarn. And if they were spinning yarn, that meant they had, well, something that produced wool, probably sheep. And they had women because men didn't do that. So to me, that spells colony, but it gets even better because they also had butternuts as a foodstuff, and butternuts today do not grow within about 500 miles of Lonzo Meadows. So in 1000 or so, 998, Leif Erikson went to Vinland and established a colony. And Leif Erikson's mission from the King of Norway was to spread Christianity. That was his mission. So if there were a maintained colony of Christians in North America, then the whole papal bull thing is out the window, and therefore the Spanish claim and all the subsequent claims that came from it would be null and void. That's why you'll never get the Smithsonian to admit any of it.
Yeah, so it goes without saying that we're not told the history, and in school these kids are being taught wrong. And I wish more parents would do it. When my kids come home, I have an interest in what they're learning, and if I see something I have a description with it, I sit down and I talk to them about it, and I tell them, you go ask your teacher about that, and if you get in trouble, don't worry about it. I'll come to school and talk for you. You got to ask. You got to, if you know something's right, don't let them teach you wrong. And that's what they're doing. And it really irritates me. I mean, they're still being taught that man came from monkey, but there's missing links there. So how could you teach that as?
But it's not just a couple of missing links either.
Oh, I know. It's ridiculous. So
yeah, there are so many holes in what I call conventional science that it's worthy of a book or encyclopedia treatment all by itself. And in fact, I'm kind of working on that and folding in the whole hollow earth theory and whatnot as a history of science gone wrong. As an example, you mentioned Edmund Halley earlier, for whom he named or is named Halley's Comet, which we last saw in, 1986.
Yeah.
And I won't live long enough to see it again. But the period has held. It's definitely the same one he saw. But that's just the one example of his scientific efforts that for which he is known. Most people have forgotten about his whole hollow Earth, multiple spherical Earth research. And even more to the point, that his development of that theory came about as a result of his investigation of the magnetic field of the Earth, where he got on a ship, sailed throughout the North Atlantic, taking compass readings and star readings, so that he was trying to determine whether you could use the compass readings for trade to America, as an example. But he was also looking for evidence that the changes in the magnetic north versus true north were static, and they are not. They're moving constantly. So his voyage is the first scientific data that we have for what is called declination of the magnetic north versus true north, or astronomical north, or polar north, or axial north, take your pick, geographic north. So the history of how they got from that to a chronometer on every ship is the subject of yet a third book for me, which is right now in the outline stage. But going back all the way to Pythias, and even back to the people on Crete 120,000 years ago, somebody knew how to sail and how to navigate a long, long time ago. But Halley, upon returning from his voyage to the North Atlantic, went to see this little known guy by the name of Isaac Newton, who at that point had not published anything. And it was Halley's encouragement and, in fact, his money that got Newton to publish Principia. So we wouldn't know about Newton at all if it hadn't been for Edmund Halley.
Incredible. Incredible. Well, Rick, let's take another break here. And when we come back, I want to ask you about skeletons and giants and even dwarfs. And
cool.
get into that a little bit. So hang on with us, everybody. This is Late Night in the Midlands. I'm Michael Vera. And if you've got a question or a comment, you're more than welcome to call in and talk with Rick. 803-317-2264, and we will be back in just my guy is. But other than that, let's get back to it. Rick, skeletons, giants, and dwarfs. What, well, we don't know, but what do you know?
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
Oh my.
The giant skeleton thing is pervasive. South Carolina is one of only 2 states that has no reported skeletons, incidentally. And incidentally, it also has some of the deepest, thickest, what they call black mat layer on the continent. But the giant skeletons are pervasive. Even to Hawaii, they had 7-footers on Maui. And they had 8.5-footers here in Indiana, one of them just about less than 30 miles from me. I've actually been to the site. I've investigated the case as best you can almost 200 years later, but all the witnesses cited in the newspaper reports were living people, and they were responsible people in the community. And the 2 different reports are very close in their descriptions, not identical. So to me, that one has at least some semblance of reality, but that's just one of several dozen skeletons just in Indiana. There were literally hundreds of reports of giant skeletons, some with polydentia, meaning double rows of teeth, polydactylism, meaning multiple extra digits, and they had copper implements and ornaments. The one skeleton that was south of me was buried in an oaken coffin that was clad in copper both inside and outside. And he had copper armor type implements on him. So the descriptions are fairly detailed for a bunch of, pioneers, essentially, because this was brand new territory when most of these were unearthed. But you don't have to go that far back to find accounts. For instance, San Antonio, the big newspaper in San Antonio in 1947 published a big story about a 7.5 footer that was discovered there. They're not all ancient history. You can go back and find Smithsonian journals where they're discussing measuring the bones and whatnot in the Smithsonian journals. But if you go to the Smithsonian today and ask about them, we have no idea what you're talking about. We never had any giant bones. We don't have them now, and they don't exist. Don't ask again. And yet, at almost every account after 1840, they described the bones were boxed up and sent to the Smithsonian. So what happened to them?
Good question.
We don't know. But you can go any state or places that weren't states at the time, and there are accounts, numeral, multiple, poly accounts of giant skeletons being unearthed, whether it's in mounds or caves or niches in rocks, or in some cases just a few scattered bones. But Lovelock Cave, as an example, they extracted a couple of full mummies, and they were on display for a very long time, and they were 8-footers.
So,
and you had local Native American legends of, they were a pain in the butt and they were eating our people, so we just forced them all into that cave and smoked them to death. Suffocated them with sage smoke.
Okay, so then giants, now I've seen lots of pictures. I've heard one side say, oh, those are all fake. But so these giants, and I believe they are, but I'll get confirmation now, they are real.
They were at one time. And it's not just in North America. It's all over the world. Any place that there's been a population for a long time, they at least have tales of the giants. If you go to Peru, you can still see giant skulls. They're still there. You can still see them. They're on display, and they're weird. They have this elongated cranium that, in those cases, is not a result of boarding, but it just grew that way. The cases of, tying a board to a child's head to elongate the cranium is almost certainly a way of paying homage to their gods or priests or whatever these larger beings were. You go to Egypt and you look at the bust of Nefertiti as an example. She's got this long hat that angles back at the exact same angle as those Peruvian skulls. And when you see depictions of her or several of the other royal families, they appear to be twice as tall as all the other people around them. And they probably were. You can go to Maya country. Lord Pakal was about 8 feet 4.5 inches. And when you see the sarcophagus lid of him, as Eric von Daniken said, flying this spacecraft, well, that's not what I think it is, but if you use the height of that skeleton to scale that machine he was in, it was a pretty cool machine. size of a semi, whatever it was. But I don't think it was flying. I think it was digging. I think it was one of those tunnel boring machines. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he was a big dude, and the sarcophagus lid was over an empty sarcophagus. An antechamber to that had all the bodies, and it wasn't just one, it was 5 individuals. 4 that were weird, giant, or otherwise weird, and 1 human that was probably a sacrifice. So the giants were pervasive. And their portrayals in ancient art is pretty well uniform, with this long head and big stature. And of course, they were men of renown, meaning they were also big enough to take over the leadership of whatever political unit they wanted to. Ancient Rome had its own giant, about 8'6", and he became the emperor of Rome. So, of course, nobody believes that he was really that big. It was just, overstated because he was emperor. Well, they gave the exact heights of every other emperor. Why would he be half again as tall?
Isn't the tallest man, I think, in the Guinness Book of World Records, isn't it 9 feet something?
It was 8'11", Robert Wadlow.
Oh, okay. 8'11".
Yeah. And that was probably a slight exaggeration. He was about 8'9" at death. And he was a pituitary giant, but not all of them are. He grew because his pituitary never shut off. And he literally grew out of his body, and he couldn't walk well, and he had to wear braces, and that's eventually what killed him. He was wearing braces on a long walk, got a blister, got infected, and he died. They didn't have enough penicillin on site for a body that size, apparently.
I thought maybe he had the bloodline.
Well, it may be some kind of a throwback to the bloodline. But you can also find just individuals who, for no pituitary reason, they just grow and grow and grow. Angus McGaskill was one of those. He was 7'9" at death. He was advertised in Barnum and Bailey as 8 feet tall, but he was not. But he was big enough that he would make the NBA guys look pretty small. And as a stunt one time for pay, he lifted and carried a 1,000-pound anchor.
Wow.
And he lived, I believe he was 64. I'd have to look it up to know exactly how long he lived, but he traveled with Barnum and Bailey the latter half or so of his life as a sideshow act, and his partner in that sideshow act was General Tom Thumb, who was 22 inches tall. By the way, both of their skeletons are preserved pretty much as you would have seen them in life, standing next to each other.
Wow.
You also have an historical account from Britain around 912, I believe it was, AD, of a Viking invader who was supposed to have been 9 feet tall. Ivar the Boneless was his name. And if he was 9 feet tall, he probably had a lot of bones, and they were big ones. But interestingly enough, in 1960, that may be wrong, 1981, I believe it was, an archaeological supervised, fairly well documented excavation of that battle site of Ivar turned up a femur from a 9-foot skeleton.
Wow.
And it's still available for study.
Now, I'm curious why these things aren't taught. I don't remember ever learning about giant skeletons when I was in school, and I certainly don't see it on the news ever. Hey, look, big skeleton discovered. They don't tell us about these things. Why?
Isn't that a good question? For one thing, and this is just, speculation, perhaps they, being the establishment, including lamestream media, are afraid that anything that mentions giants would be some validation for the Bible. Right. And I view the Old Testament, at least, as a pretty good historical reference. It's not got it all right as far as history, but it's a pretty good reference and cross-reference for other sources. And it's fairly accurate in some regards. Of course, it's a little one-sided because there were a lot of other people back there at that time in that region doing other things.
Right.
But we can verify that Solomon had a friend named Hiram, King Hiram, and that he was a Phoenician, and that his fleet sailed at least as far as the gates of Hercules, Um, he left the Mediterranean. His fleets did, and they came back with 10 as one commodity. And the only way they could get 10 by leaving there was one of two places, either Cornwall in England, what is now England, or in Bolivia for the purity that was returned to the Middle East and traded all over the Middle East and even over into India. And that tin trade was, I mean, whoever controlled that was the Bill Gates of their era. And that was King Hiram. So at the time of Solomon, who paid Hiram to borrow his masons, they were free masons. They weren't enslaved or indentured masons under Hiram. They were free men, but he loaned out his crew or leased them out or whatever so that Solomon can build his temple. Those are facts of history from multiple sources. And yet they don't want to lend any credence to that one account that says basically the same thing because it puts too much religion in it.
See, and that goes with what I believe. I believe that, for me anyways, and not to put it down for anyone else, but I believe that the Bible is at least, if nothing else, a good historical reference. And, you know, you got to think about the way they may have interpreted things back then, you know.
The way I like to describe the Old Testament as a tool of history is it's like crib notes.
Right.
It gives you the highlights, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Exactly, and that's how I see it too. Some people think that it's irrelevant altogether, and I think there's something to be learned there. So I wouldn't just brush it off.
True, and it's been rewritten. I should say recopied. Some of it for, 2,800 years. There may be some traveling error factors in there, but for the most part, I think it's generally true to its original statement, which it was oral history for we don't know how long before it was written history.
Right. Okay. And so now I want to give you some questions that I've gotten from the different chat rooms tonight. Okay. One wanted me to ask you what the significance of the Falls of Ohio were. They mean geology-wise and even anything you could tell them about that.
Oh, well, how long we got?
We got as long as you need. I mean, I'm on for another hour yet. So
okay. The Falls of the Ohio is currently at Louisville, Kentucky, Clarksville, Indiana. Geologically speaking, the bedrock there is 300, 350 years old and younger as you go up the sides of the riverbank. Some of the oldest fossils of multi-cell stuff is there. Geologically, it's hard to tell how it exactly formed, but it was certainly ocean bottom for a long time because you can still see the corals and stuff in the what I call living rock, but bedrock in the riverbed. When the river's down, you can see a lot of it. It's been fascinating to geologists ever since they got there. In fact, earlier today, I was just reading about a hero of archaeology in Wisconsin, got started in Louisville, describing his first published work was about a canal that was being dug through Louisville neighborhoods to get around that falls for steamboats and barges and whatnot. And he did a good job of describing the geology as far as geology was known then, 170 years ago, give or take. And anyway, the Falls of the Ohio is the only significant falls on the entire Ohio River below Pittsburgh. And of course, Pittsburgh has other rivers feeding into what becomes the Ohio there, the Monongahela and the Allegheny, both of them very navigable, both of them part of that whole signal network thing that stretched throughout the riverbeds. And the riverbeds were, the highway. They were the interstate system of 1,000 to 2,000, maybe even 3,000 years ago. So wherever your interstates today go is where your cell towers go. And 3,000 years ago, wherever your rivers went is where these signal towers went. It wasn't quite as fast as a cell tower network, but it was faster than any of the credentialed folks want to admit. So the Falls of the Ohio was someplace that whenever you were using that river for transport, you had to stop there. So it's been a seat of political unit by hook or by crook for a very, very long time. It's got a series of burials from 6 or 8 different cultures in the immediate area, let's say a 20-mile radius. But the most interesting to me of the burial phases is what's called a stone box grave, which have been found from West Virginia to Missouri and even Tennessee, northern Georgia. I don't know of any in South Carolina, but that's, who knows, could be. But at the same time this existed, which was roughly 500 AD up to about 800 AD, when this burial phase occurred, is precisely the same time frame that you find what is called a slab-sided grave in Wales. And they're in form and function and general construction identical. And in the early phase of the Mississippian stone box grave, there are no artifacts with body. Later on there were. In the stone box graves, there are no artifacts. In the slab-sided graves in Wales, there are no artifacts. But over there are no bodies either, because it's too acidic a soil and the bones don't survive for 1,400 years. The point being, something caused two cultures, identical and coincidental in time, completely contemporary, to initiate a new burial style. And it survived in both places for about the same amount of time. And yet, oh no, it's independent invention. When you've got this legend about Prince Matic of Wales inhabiting this fort 14 miles upstream from the Falls of the Ohio, being driven out by a conglomeration and a federation of native tribes, because these Welshmen were a real pain in the ass, and drove them down the river and slaughtered them to a person on Sand Island right below the falls. Today, overlooking that falls, is the Falls of the Ohio Museum and Interpretive Center, which is currently undergoing a $5.5 or maybe $7.5 million renovation. Well, up until just 4 or 5 years ago, in the main atrium of this museum and atrium center, which is a state of Indiana facility now, they had a diorama of Prince Matic in full regalia, and told the tale of how he and the band of colonists arrived there and were driven out and killed. But the state of Indiana said, oh no, there was nobody here before Columbus, get that out of here. And today, or well, not even today, last fall, there was an 8.5 by 11 typed out sheet describing it, and that was all that was left of that legend as far as the state of Indiana is concerned. However, if you go out to the site of the 14 Mile Creek Fort, they have an interpretive sign there that includes the legend, and it's now, I don't know, 30 by 25 or so, describing the legend. And I'm proud of them for that they even acknowledge that the legend is there. And you can find the legend even in archaeological text, papers, even within the last decade or two. But they always laugh it off. Yeah. Well, that's been pretty much the point of my study over the last 5-6 years anyway, because the person who brought that to a scientific study, that particular fortress, was a guy by the name of Edward Cox, and he was the state of Indiana geologist, 1869, 70, 73, on up to about 1880, I think. And he was asked during a visit nearby to go see this place because it was weird. And he described it as a fortress, number one. He described the existence of mounds and other features on this bluff, 240 feet above the river, and most of it so steep you couldn't climb it with gear. You couldn't free climb it, certainly.
Jeez.
And he described part of the bluff where they had quarried stone for part of the man-made wall. And then he described another very extensive, massive defensive wall that was not from that quarry. And yet there was no quarry nearby to supply that stone. And that was published in 1873. He was there for a day or so. His assistant was there a little longer taking some measurements. The wall was roughly 510 to 540 feet long. Could have been as long as 600, but that would be a stretch. 12 feet high, 20 feet thick. It had 4 or 5 entrances. And it would have been completely defensible. But what was most interesting is that some of the facilities that appeared to be left up on this bluff would not have been defensive in nature unless they had some form of, I'd have to call it artillery, something that would throw a projectile the width of the Ohio River, nearly a half a mile. Now let's get back to the Romans with their ballistas that would throw a 100-pound rock a quarter of a mile. If they took the same piece of machinery and put a 50-pound rock on it, how far would it throw it? Roughly a half a mile.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was listening, and you know, I was listening, and I said, "Well, oh wait, is that for me?"
Yeah,
you
it's for
caught
everybody.
Me off guard. But
so the Falls of the Ohio is very significant in a number of ways. For my research, it's most significant as its relationship to the fortress at 14 Mile Creek, which is also known as Devil's Backbone or Rose Island or a number of other names in the historic period. It was first described on paper by General George Rogers Clark. And it would be difficult for him to mistake it as a fortress. If he saw it and he said it's a fortress, then it probably was a fortress. And he even asked some of the native tribes, the chiefs, who built it. And one of those chiefs said, well, we thought we'd killed off all of your kind, tall, red-headed, blue-eyed pains in the ass. But here you are. And no, we didn't build it. And they had metal and other arts that we still don't know. This was in 1787 or so, and that conversation took place.
Okay. Well, I hope that answers the listener's question. Certainly a detailed answer. Thank you. Now, the next one is, someone asked what mica was used for in the mounds.
This is a conjecture based on other factors. But my opinion is that mica was used as a reflector for sunlight for this whole signaling network thing. That was their daytime signaling media, if you will. And if anyone who's ever used a telegraph or used Morse code in any way, whether it's shortwave or whatever, they know that you can devise a code of simple series of flashes instead of clicks, flashes that would do the same thing. And you can do it with a signal mirror today, and they still issue signal mirrors as survival gear in many military outfits. And you can use it that way. Well, they could use it that way too. And the mound builders apparently revered these people who managed these communications network and buried them with the goods of their trade. And that was the mica, in my opinion. There were also a couple of highly polished brass and or bronze artifacts that could have been used, and they were found in mounds. Also, that's a little weird. They had metallurgy.
Yeah, that is weird. All right. And outside of that, I think I've got one more here that somebody had asked. Let me see here. Well, they want to know who was the Golden Bear, because your book is Graves of the Golden Bear. So they want to know who the Golden Bear was.
Well, okay. Not even in the book do I make it this simple, but I start leaving trails, clues in the introduction. The Golden Bear is one of the nicknames of King Arthur II. And the graves, plural, is because King Arthur II, this is according to the research of Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett, was buried in 3 different places as a minimum. One of them in, I believe, in northeastern Alabama. The second one in a different cave back in Wales, and the third one was his permanent, or at least semi-permanent, interment at St. Peter's Church in Wales. Little bitty tiny place. So graves plural, Golden Bear, King Arthur II.
Okay. And now, if you have anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to touch on, any links you'd like to get out, maybe you could tell people where they can get their hands on the book, the books, I should say, then please go ahead. The floor is yours, sir. And I want to thank you so much for being a guest tonight. I've really enjoyed the information. I know the listeners have as well, and I'm looking forward to having you back. And we had no issues this time.
Yeah, that's the best part. The Graves of the Golden Bear is available on Amazon as Candelore print. It's also available from the publisher, which is not me, and it's Grave Distractions Publications. It just happens to be a connect there. And it's gravedistractions.com. It's also on Nook and available for order through Barnes & Noble as print. Also order through Books A Million, and I don't know how many other places, but it's also on Diesel as an ebook. Sony, I don't know if there's an iBook version yet or not. Google Book, Smashword, a few others. It's also available through Ancient American Magazine, and that's my segue into. I'm also writing a series of articles based loosely around the book, but concentrating more on the river fortresses and the communications network for Ancient American. The first one came out in the December issue. Next one will be in the March issue. It's a quarterly. And this could go on for years, actually. Also look me up, Rick Osmond, on YouTube or Oopa Loopa Cafe. I'm also part and parcel of thei.us or the HollowEarthInsider.com, which is basically the same site. And, wow, I'm all over the place.
You got, I don't know if you've mentioned this, but Facebook as well, right? That's you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Great. Well, there are 2 different Rick Osmonds, at least, on Facebook, but yeah, you'll find me. I'm in a lot of discussion groups on Facebook as well. All of them good, I might add.
Good.
Let's see, what else? Graves of the Golden Bear has its own Facebook page, so give updates there once in a while. And I'm doing these radio shows a lot as a guest. I did a lot as a host for years.
Yeah, it's what I find is for me anyways, being a host and then going on somebody's show as a guest, it takes some getting used to.
Yeah, but you don't have as many headaches usually.
Yeah, that's true.
Don't have technical headaches if you're not hosting.
That's correct. Yeah, I'll tell you, it's people think that it's easy. You just get on and turn on your mic and get going. It don't work like that. I wish it was that easy.
On a perfect night so far tonight, it has been like that, and I thank you for that.
All right. Well, I thank you too, and we'll keep in touch, and I will definitely have you back. And I'm going to stick your links up permanently on my links page on
Appreciate that.
latenightmidlands.com. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rick, and keep up the good work, and give me a shout out when you finish the new book.
Will do, Michael. I appreciate it.
My guest, who I'll be bringing on here just in a moment or two, is Rick Osmond, and I want to see how bad I can tear up this bio. Rick Osmond was selected for the United States Air Force Academy right out of high school. He later attended Vicini's University and earned an Associate's of Science in Laser and Electro-Optics Technology. He worked for defense contractors a number of years and then took a job with the U.S. Navy as a civilian with an engineering support field activity specializing in radar, night vision, and laser equipment for surveillance. And munitions guidance. Most of this work was in direct support of special operation forces, equipment acquisitions. In that capacity, Rick also became familiar with video teleconferencing technology. But all those years, Rick was also reading everything he could find out about the weird and unusual. Well, he's coming to the right place tonight. History, archaeology, geography, cartography, yeah, and anyways, a whole bunch of stuff, including hollow earth theory. After leaving government employment in 2004, Rick began his hunt for hidden knowledge full time. He also began blogging, researching, and writing. And in early 2007, started an internet radio show entitled the Oopa Lupa Cafe, or I believe that's cafe. Again, my stuff is all chopped up here. In 2008, he began pestering his longtime research buddy, Dennis Crenshaw, to start another internet show about the various mysteries. Dennis chose the title, Unraveling the Secrets, and he's here tonight, and hopefully we can unravel some of those secrets. So let me go ahead and get him on the air with us here. And here we go. All right, yes, let the festivities begin. I agree. Rick Osmond, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing just fine, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you tonight. Fascinating work that you do. I've been watching a lot of your videos that are out on YouTube and checking out a lot of different information. You've done some fascinating work, and I'm looking forward to talking about it tonight.
Cool. Yeah, the work continues just like any field.
Yeah, it never ends. Once you get going down that rabbit hole, it just keeps going and going and going, doesn't it?
It seems like it, yeah. In fact, an acquaintance friend of mine actually turned me on to 3 new ruins somewhere near me, a couple counties over. So I'll go investigate those as soon as I can.
Awesome.
The solid core should be at about 2/3 the radius. I'm sorry, 1/3 the radius from the center out. And what's inside there, how much of that would be a void, that's kind of tough to say because we don't have any good science. All we have is theory. The deepest hole that's ever been bored was a little bit short of 14 kilometers in Kola in Siberia, Kamchatka. And they got results they did not expect. They got results that do not match the accepted geological theory. But rather than adapt the theory to newly found facts, they say that's anomalous and we're going to stick with our theory.
I see. I was always under the impression, I have some friends in the chat who on various nights will talk about the earth being hollow. And I always said, well, if it was hollow and there was a major earthquake, wouldn't it all just collapse? I don't know.
No, actually it would not, because the mass and distribution of the mass would not significantly change with regards to where the center of mass is.
I see.
It would be felt, but what I'm saying is it's not attracted to the center of the Earth except as a sum vector. It's attracted to the mass around it. Mass attracts mass. That's what Newton gave us, and that part's still true no matter what you do to the rest of the physics. What Newton said, he didn't say that the apple fell to Earth. He said that the apple and the Earth fell towards each other. Just that the Earth had a lot more mass and therefore a lot more inertia, and it seemed like the Earth didn't move. But it did, even against the mass of an apple. And that's what he demonstrated by the invention of calculus. Smart guy.
Yeah, that's incredible. So then it is possible, or even more than possible, it may be that we have a hollow Earth, a big area inside the Earth that's hollowed out, and I mean, people would be able to actually live in it?
No, I'm not willing to go that far,
okay,
because
good.
there's so much more to that as far as it being a hollow space, because if that's true, now you're looking at the possibility of what we call zero crossing energies. And that would be the vacuum energy, the energy from the vacuum, the ZPM module from Stargate. It takes the energy of the vacuum and converts it to energy that we can use in our spectrum.
I see.
And that is, when you get down into the deepest theories, way past Einstein, in fact, a little bit past Michio Kaku, you get to the point of each one of those is a little black hole, white hole pair. And by those forming at the center of the Earth, where there would be a gravitational gradient, you could actually be making new matter from nothing.
I see. You know, I was looking into I was looking into some of this earlier today, and I noticed Plato had wrote of enormous subterranean tunnels that were both broad and narrow that made up the Earth's interior. And I'm wondering, could there be actual tunnels going all through?
Well, if you believe Tau Levesque, yeah, at least in North America and probably elsewhere. But, you know, the United States, even down to municipalities, have spent millions, even billions of dollars on tunnel boring machines. One made the news recently in Seattle because it got stopped by something, turned out to be an 8-inch pipe, but they didn't know it was there, therefore they stopped the progress of the boring machine for a while. But tunnel boring machines are big business, and some of the current technologies were developed by the United States Air Force, which is a little weird all by itself, but they did nonetheless. In fact, they had, at least on paper, an atomic powered tunnel boring machine.
Uh-huh. So, but I mean, would they be able to go that deep? I mean, I would think that, you know, they'd bury themselves if they kept going. Maybe.
Well, it's not only that, but what do they do with the tailings?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I know that there's been a lot of speculation. As you know, there's people who got all kinds of theories. And, you know, one theory was that there's actually somewhat of a sun in the center of the Earth that provides sunlight and heat and this and that. And I won't go that far. I've always said, well, it's possible that it could be a hollow Earth, but I don't know. You're clearing it up for me here tonight, though, because I always thought I had the answer. I said, well, if it was hollow, there was an earthquake, it'd collapse. But now I'm finding out I was wrong.
Well, yeah, the physics says it would not collapse. It would change, because that much of energy release will change anything. But that takes us back to the inner sun and this new matter creation. Because in order for that new matter creation to happen, there would be a lot of waste energy. And if it was at a pinpoint at the center of the Earth in this void, then that would be a very, very energetic space that would not support life as we know it, because you cook instantly. It's just there are 4 terawatts of energy emanated from the Earth every day that the Earth did not get from the sun or any other part of the solar system or any place outside the Earth itself. That's just energy release. Now, the conventional geology and planetology says that's leftover friction from when the Earth formed 4 billion years ago.
Yeah, everything seems to be from the Earth forming 4 billion years ago, you know. But somebody in the chat here asked, doesn't the core revolve? Awesome. So why don't we start a little bit with some background? Give the listeners some of your background, because, you know, I chop up the bio. And
Okay. Basically, I worked for the government for a long time, whether it was directly or through a contractor. And my field there was laser and electro-optics technology, which is basically hard science as compared to most archaeology or psychology or a number of other soft sciences, I call them. So when I go into an archaeological or historical situation, I'm looking at the facts, not the interpretation of the facts. What are the facts? That's the first thing you have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And then you have to take into consideration that you may not have all the facts, ever, especially in archaeology. So I have to sympathize a little bit with the doctrinal archaeologists, because their hands are pretty much tied within most bounds as to what they can do with what they have. And they know that they don't have everything. Right. But what they will refuse to do is accept that there was any contact with ancient America before Columbus. In most cases, there are exceptions. But that is the hardest thing to break through. You can give a dozen different explanations of what an artifact was or how it was used or who made it or where, and you'll get a sane discussion. You mentioned pre-Columbian contact, and no, you're an idiot, or you're a faker, or you're a hoaxer, or maybe you're just confused. But it can't be.
Right. So now, have you ever spoke with Michael Cremo? I know he does a lot of good work as well, and he's certainly not tied in with the mainstreamers.
He is not. He certainly is not tied in with the mainstreamers. In fact, a number of the mainstreamers tried to get his television show, a television show done about his book, Forbidden Archaeology, tried to get it banned, and he tried to get, I believe it was NBC, to retract all of it. And it didn't happen. Michael Cremo is, in that regard, if nothing else, a little bit of a hero.
Yeah, I've had him on the show several times. I love Michael Cremo. He's same thing. You know, he goes for the facts and he says it like it is, and you know, he doesn't let anybody bend or break him. And I like that.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. And
there is another artifact that has come to light close by me that would interest him a lot. It's actually in a museum nearby, and it is a metal that seems to presume to be copper-based, probably brass, and it came from a coal seam. So, interesting.
Very interesting.
So that would be right up Michael's alley.
Yeah, you know, when I talk to him, he says that there's enough evidence to show that mankind has been here hundreds of thousands of years. He said even millions of years in some aspects.
Well, there's certainly some evidence. Mm-hmm. How you interpret that evidence is entirely up to your belief system, believe it or not.
Right.
Whether that's hardcore science or whatever. But, of course, you also have the young earthers who would say, oh, no, it's not that old. You're just misreading what the geology's telling you. It's, you know, the Earth's only 4,800 years old. I'm not one of those, by the way. Okay. But the upshot is there are a lot of mysteries. The evidence is out there. Whether you can prove to me that those metallic spheres are somehow a natural phenomenon is going to be kind of tough until you can actually demonstrate it for me. because one theory is as good as another until you have some demonstration of a theory. And nobody knows how those spheres came to be. You know the ones I'm talking about that are in 2 billion-year-old strata.
Yeah.
Michael's done amazing work along that line. But there are other things, like for instance, the metal vessels in coal seams, or a gold necklace that fell out of a piece of coal. Dozens of examples in, I won't say in the literature because they won't accept it as scientific literature. It's newspaper accounts and, you know, anything. It might be Argosy magazine. That doesn't mean it's absolutely false. It simply means that there wasn't a qualified entire university there to witness it. There were a lot of witnesses who were credible people, however.
Right, right. And I want to get into quite a bit of that as we move along, but I did want to ask you about the hollow earth and whether you believed that it's possible that there's a hollow earth, and if so, what might wait below?
Well, strangely enough, I do believe that there is a void at the center of the earth. It's not a belief, it's a calculation, actually.
I see. That's better than a belief.
Yeah, it's the basis of the theory is that, or my interpretation of the theory, is that the acceleration due to gravity at the exact center of the earth is zero. Well, that's not just my theory, that's just the way it is. And actually, from the exact center of the earth, the acceleration vector would be pointing out, just that zero is the sum of all of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's zero at the exact center and it's actually pulling towards the outside, there's actually more gravitational mass, if you will, outside the center of the earth than there is at the center of the earth. Therefore, what would normally be, you know, what they call the hard core, the solid core, would be there. But that doesn't make sense.